In this video help, I'm going to be doing the purchase and purchase portal and project suppliers. What I want to point out before I get going though, I'm going to go back to the inventory screen and I want, hit it twice. Okay, here we go. I'm going to show you in the project inventory screen, I've added some additional things. For example, I've added MTBF, which is mean time before failure, and repairability in this particular screen. And these are editable as far as taking care of and changing things. You can see in here I put repairable, not repairable, consumable, salvage, and core. So you may want to add something to that. But what I really want to point out is in this screen, which is where you add the records, and I'm going to repeat this so it's obvious. You can create a record in here and say, for example, I didn't fill these in. You can always go to the portal and continue after you've added the basic information and you have an ID that's assigned to that record. So you can always go back in and add or modify things in this record. For example, if I go over here to the portal and I'm running through the portal, and by the way, this portal has some additional information that I just added and I want to point out that was not in the previous video. I'm going to show you that the vendor cost was here, and if I take where I've just added this margin field, you click on it and point 1 is 10%, 2%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and so forth. In this screen, if you add these, you can edit it and then edit these record data that you have in here, like up to a 60%, but you can add as much as you need to. You can even go over 100%. But what I'm going to point out here is that when you click off, it'll actually change it to the actual percentage. And what I've done down here is I've said that this item is from the vendor is $790. If you go down here and you change this, say to 30%, you'll notice that the price will change by up to the 30% based on the $790 price. So I'm going to put it back to the 20%. And you can see that it goes back to $948. Well, all the records now, when you create them, will allow you to put in the percentage of margin, and you can go in and you can actually sub this. For example, if you wanted it to be 10.5% or whatever, you can modify these and they'll pop in because they'll go where they should be when you add them on the edit screen. So just put a line in when you edit it, click in, do a return, put it 1.5 or whatever you want to have in there. As far as, don't forget the decimal point, because obviously if you don't and you just put in 1, it's going to be 100%, and if you put 5, it's going to be 150%. You don't need that, so make sure you check it. And let's go now back to the main screen, and we're going to go over, and I'm going to slow down a bit because this whole area that we're talking about in purchase and so forth down through these records, it needs to be covered completely, and you need to understand exactly what's going on when we're working through it. So let's go ahead and start. Once again, as you're going through the records in here, you put the product purchase, start the purchase order using this record header. The header is a record that you're viewing right here. In this case, there's 2 records in here now for the project ID number 1, which is actually the project P1, when we use that when we started the record. You can see that there is none of the record data in here as far as the actual project ID. And the reason for that is that a lot of times, or every time, when you're doing a purchase, it's not necessarily for a project. As far as, you might be buying stuff for multiple things. But what I suggest you do is be careful, because every time you create an item for a particular product and you created it in the inventory, it's going to indicate that that was created for project 1. So when you do an inventory add, for example, when I go over here to the project inventory and I added this item, this was actually added under the project for project 1 in the inventory. So consequently, when you look at the actual record, when we get down into the purchase data, you're going to see that the items that were purchased for this project will have a 1 in the project information when you're doing the purchase. So it'll give you an indication that if you have multiple, say for example, this right here is a good example, the 1213AJ, that's the part number. The part number can reoccur for different projects. And typically, if you're ordering them at a different time, there may even be multiple times that this is ordered. The only thing that you should do, though, when you're doing this is pick from the list of items that you're buying by the project that you're going into. In that indication, I'll show you what we're going to be doing. Over here in the portal record for the inventory, you'll see that it's got the same price in there for two different ones, but one of these is for project 1 and the other one's for project 2. So what that'll do is that all the parts that were ever ordered for project 1 or project 2 would show up with an ID of 1 or whatever. And the same thing goes for if you're going to project 10 or 30. It won't make any difference. And what'll happen, typically if you're doing business where your projects and products that you're doing are repetitive, and we're going to be talking about that later when we get into production, would repeat only for that particular project. If you're doing that, it should show up in this project with the ID 1 for that project. And likewise, project 2 and so forth. So when you're doing a report later on for the items that were provided under the project contract, then it's pretty easy to tell what contract that they were actually done for by looking at 1 or the number that sequences up. It's pretty important to understand that now so that later on you'll be ready to see that. And another thing that when we're going through, you need to understand that this particular area here, until you actually do a purchase or you're using something as a work order, this will stay blank. So you don't edit in this particular field. It'll summarize based on when you actually do a purchase, and then it'll show the data as far as the data that shows up in this screen. So you won't edit in this portal. When you move to the project purchasing, you'll see some of these things come into play and how it actually works. So right now, just for informational, this will not work until it actually is purchased or used in a work order invoice. Okay, so let's go back over, and we go back down to the project marketing part and down to our listing items, and we're going to go into purchase. Since we are here, I'll point out that there is a vendor list for the vendors themselves in this, and that's kind of important because if you don't see it up here, like there's 3 of them added now. And in this particular case, what I did is I put the address in there for each one of these. And I'm not sure exactly how the telephone number got in there. That's kind of interesting. It was probably put in the wrong field when it was added. Why I'm saying that, I want to point out that the records that are in this, these current records that are in here that we're using for project 1 and 2, chances are I will probably remove and reset a lot of this stuff. But right now for the presentation, kind of pay real good attention to what is being said, because when you receive the application, these fields may all be blank and we're sequencing from purchase order 1, for example. Okay, let's go through the actual record that we're putting in. And this is the header record, meaning what we're doing is we're setting up a header here. And the reason for that is we didn't do the, and we're going to show you this in the purchase portal, that we do the header, then we do the portal. What happens in these popovers, you can have a header, but you can't have a header and a portal in the same record in the popover. So you have to be kind of careful to understand that. If you want to bounce out and go over to the purchase listing or the vendor listing or to the portal for this, you should be able to do that. Let's walk through the fields. Obviously, the date of the transaction, you're creating a new header. It'll automatically put the next purchase number in here for you. The status you will have to put up, and you can see it's another one of the edit lists. And in this case, you see the place the order, pending order, receive the order, short shipped, RMA sent, RMA resolved, completed the order. This is for each individual item that's being ordered. For example, this course is the header, but when, say like there's something in the actual order that is not completed and the order is not finished, say you ordered 10 items and there's 3 or 4 of them that have not been shipped to you from that same vendor. And realize this, when you're putting in a header, you're putting in the header for that vendor for that purchase order. You're not putting in multiple vendors on one purchase order. So if you're going to say go to Apex and then you're going to go to LEO construction for the same job, for the same products that you need, but they're chopped at different vendors, you have to have a new header for each vendor that you're going to be ordering on. And it will give a separate purchase order number for that vendor. That should make sense for anybody that's worked in doing accounting and logistics as far as ordering things and purchasing items. Okay, so if you have shipping on this particular purchase order, you would have to put that in either here or the portal screen to bring up the full sum of everything you're spending on that particular thing for that particular vendor for that purchase order. You would go down through here, and in this particular case, the sum of materials in this thing is going to be brought over to this screen from the purchase portal, and it's going to be summarized from the portal. So you really have nothing in here except for the shipping to put in, but you can still do that when we go to the portal record for this header. And the next thing is you add the vendor in there. You don't have to edit this, of course. And what it'll do is it'll summarize all this information for that particular portal. And then when we're actually in working the actual record, there will be a place where you can put what you've paid back to the particular vendor for that order for all those items. So here's the sum paid. You could add it here if you want to, but you can also add it in the portal. So let's go ahead and take a look at the portal and see what's in the portal. Okay, when we reach the portal now, we're not in a popover. So what happens, since we're in the portal and the header record, now here's the header we were just looking at. We created the record in the marketing screen, then we came over to this screen, and what we're doing is we're going to add the additional data that's going to be ordered in the portal down here, and the information down here will be summarized in the sum of the quantity purchased and the received quantity balance that's ordered, and it should be coming to you. And in this particular case, the summary for all the items is going to be up here. So I was saying before, you can add the shipping if you want to in here. If there's no shipping and it's covered in the expense for the items that you're buying, you could go ahead and do it and put it in this screen as also like you did the other one. This status here would be updated as you provide the information. For example, if in the portal I pick the part number for the item I want to actually order, look at this while you're doing it and make sure that the AJ, which says floodlight set, you come over in the description and you pick the floodlight set. Now this is all alphanumeric, so if you type the first few characters FLO, it'll bring only the floods up here or whatever the other things that are alphabetized for as many syllables as you put in. Like if I put FL, I might get something else, but if I put FLO, it's probably going to just show this record so you can pick it. So you don't have to scroll through all this stuff in this list just to get the item you're looking for. And the same thing usually goes for part numbers. If you wanted to find a group of part numbers and you want to find the one, you could jut right to it. For example, if I had a lot more records in here and say there was an R109B and it's way down the list, if I put in R-109B, it's going to come up, or I can just put the R- and then pick it from all the things that are R-. I just wanted to point out you don't have to put the full information in here. The actual text in here is not going to be put into the field, as you can see. Only the actual part number for the item. That's why you're picking over here to find the other part of the information to be used for the order. Now when you're placing an order and you add the quantity, if you do not put a quantity in, and say for example this is a material quote, skip over the part quantity and just put the price in for the item that you want to order. And how do you know the price? Well, right over here you can see here's the product part number and there's the price for it. That's standard price. And that comes from the inventory screen. If you want to find out where this comes from, if you click this, it's going to take you over to that particular screen so you can see the percentage or anything else that you want to see as far as what was actually the inventory information for this item. Now if I go back, I can pop over here, go back here, and it's kind of a long way around. Or you can just go ahead and go over here and say purchase order, purchase folder. So here we go. Product purchasing. And there it goes. And you're in it. Okay, now be aware that when you're in this screen and you're looking at the data, there's a few other things we need to do. We need to pick the vendor that we're going to as far as for this item. Obviously, there'd be one vendor. And I thought we corrected the spelling on that. We can just go over and do that. And what we want to do here, it says vendor city. This stuff, this information was not completely filled out when I put in the vendor data. If I pick a vendor, it's going to go ahead and fill as much of the data in that was added to the supplier's record. So from the standpoint of the data filling in here, you do not have to do anything if you fill in all these fields in the actual vendor record, it should fill them in over here when you pick them from this drop list. So it makes it pretty simple for you. If you had to change a phone number, you can go to the vendor supplier actual record and then edit it, or you can, because it's a relational database. If you change it here, it's going to change it in the supplier's record. Okay, let's go down and finish up what we were doing. We got in the 948. We did 1, so it'll summarize it automatically for you. And then you pick the appropriate status, and you can edit this list if you need to by adding whatever is appropriate for your company as far as the data that's in here. QA checks, by the way, when we're in here, or RMA will be covered shortly. RMA is usually something that has to do when you receive items, and say, for example, there's a problem with the item, we would go ahead and do an RMA. But you go back over to, that's why you click over here and go over to the record that has the inventory in it and do an RMA in the inventory record. Okay, so let's move along. The date that the thing was received as opposed to the date that it was ordered. And if you receive it, you put in the date for that particular item you received. You put the quantity that was received. If you do not put in the quantity that was received, what will happen is the record for this particular part, for this particular project, will not provide an update in that field that I showed you in the inventory. The inventory will update that information as items are added. Quantity remaining. In this particular case, you can look over here. You can see that of these items that are over here for Project 1 and Project 2, the quantity on hand is all 0. Now, what that basically is saying that you should have, if you used the item and it was actually issued on a work order or invoice, this would probably go from 2 to whatever the quantity is currently. In this case, if I ordered 2 and I supplied 2 to the inventory system, which it'll automatically do, and then I used both of them, then this would turn to a 0. If that's clear, you can always jump over and click on here to see the actual item and see what's actually in there. Now, in this particular case, it depends on which project you ordered it in, whether or not it's going to show up. Now, you have to typically, if you're doing a work order, the work order will trigger this here in the work order invoice to say that the data was actually used, and then it'll update this item. As you'll notice, this is the service description, service part, and material description are a part of the material listing items for the work orders that you're working within. As you actually use them, this calls it a closed loop system. You can put them into the inventory, you can purchase them to supply them to the purchase order, but then you have to use them in order to show them as used in this particular thing in the material portal. If you don't understand what I'm saying there, you can always contact me and I can explain it again for you. So you have to be aware of that. So let's go down to purchase. And okay, so this is automatically updated as a work order is using the items. The on hand will be modified. Now, if I had a requirement for an item and I put it on the work order and it was not in there and it was all 0, it'll put a -1, meaning that there's a demand for that item. And that you have to, at this time, you would get the record up for a purchase and you start a purchase so you get the item in. And of course, as soon as you receive the item, it's going to update the inventory data so that the inventory will reflect that you have a quantity in there, and at that time that it's received, then you'll know that you can go ahead and put it in the work order. Obviously, you can't issue it until you have it, so you have to purchase the item. Now, there's that whole thing about quantities is if you have a situation where you have fast movers and you need to keep a quantity on hand, say like I needed to keep 10 on hand all the time. If I put 10 in, or order 10 of them and put them in here, it would deduct it by 2 if there was demand, and so forth. So it makes it pretty simple to understand that this is a closed loop inventory system. So anything you do in inventory, anything you do in purchase, and then anything you do in a work order invoice will affect the quantity on hand and the information for needing to order some. Now you can see I've added most of that stuff in here. Well, let's explain what this is. What we have here is a situation where we have a labor record where a person does labor, but it was actually added to the inventory system. And part of the reason for doing this is just to have an item that you can pick from the inventory that is a fill-in for the actual item from the inventory. That way you do not have to type in every time in the purchase order, work order, that this thing is this. So it uses the standard approach where you don't type in data except for in the inventory when you created it, and you put it in there as labor dash drawing development. If you're using it put in there by labor, it's going to be obvious that this is going to be an item that's going to be charged to the labor side of the invoice and not the material side, but it comes out of the inventory system. So I might have something in here that says service, outside services, and it'd be something under labor or materials, depending upon what you're actually billing as far as you're concerned. And I want to point out, if you're doing something like an outside service and you use it from inventory, it holds all the same things for the accounting price and everything that rolls over. If you would never probably in a service thing for outside services have the same pricing. So this part down here for vendor costs would not be used, and the markup would not be used, and the percentage margin would not be used. And the reason for that is you're going to go with the actual price of the item that you bought. Now what will happen if you're doing an average pricing in here, it's going to be kind of all screwed up because it's not pertinent to an item that is a service or labor. So you don't pay a lot of attention to that in here. This is very typical for the way systems work. When you create an inventory item that is actually an outside service or a labor thing, you have to be aware of that when you create those. They're going to be available to you as a drop-in where it's appropriate. Okay, let's go back over here. Go back to the purchase order. Okay, now that we're down here, we have the received item, the quantity that's remaining. In this particular case, as soon as I type this 1 in here when I receive the item, if this said 1 over here that I ordered, for example, 1-to-1, it would turn to 0, and then also would put the 1 on hand in the inventory system. And of course, then when I use it in a work order, it's going to go the other way. It's going to go down to used, and the one that's in the order would be zeroed out as far as the quantity for received, or you would obviously show it as used. It would be the used one. Okay. Standard price. This is kind of an interesting dilemma that has been created, and I'm going to show you some more about this later when we get to the work order. There's a standard price that we showed in the inventory system where we created it. Well, what it's going to do, it's going to add the price in here like $22.50. Now, if you had a 0 in there, it's going to be eliminated because it's not a numerical value that's going to have to be added in there. It'll automatically do the dollar value. But when we're doing mixing things in here and putting text in and two different things from two different values, for example, this is one, and it's going to say that this particular part that we're looking at, and this is the AJ here, that it is $948. This one's $29.40 and $22.50. And as you click on this, what it's going to do, I'm going to say the AJ, I'm going to pick it in here. It's going to put the standard price in there. And then there's the cost. This is what you paid for it. This is what it actually is going to be sold for. So if I went over there and I said, it's going to be a different price. In this particular, the AJ actually cost us $190. So if I put that in there, it's going to go ahead and show both price and cost. This will come back and show you when we get into doing the work order and stuff why we're doing price and cost. Cost is what you paid for it from this vendor. This is what you're going to sell it for. This helps you to understand when you're looking back through your records that if you're ordering items like you're doing a row item here, you know that this is typically the price that you're going to be paying for it. If it changes, you could put the item in there by clicking and then adding a different price in here after clicking a second time. What that's going to do, that's where the average price came in, where this is going to change and become the average price if it's a different price. It could be lower or greater than. So as you change it, it's going to help you to understand that when you bought it from this vendor, it affected any time you buy it if you keep on going back to the same vendor. It's not unusual at all to have vendors lower and raise things, and it's kind of even seasonal on some products where the product itself may cost something higher in the summer and lower in the winter. It's just the way marketing works. Okay. And it helps you when you go in to buy this item to understand what the last cost was when you're ordering it. This is not the information that's going to be going to the vendor, what you're selling it for. Don't worry about that. This is information that's historical, so you understand the next time you order it. And in this case, if I were going to this vendor, I would probably contact the sales department and verify all the pricing before I put it in here, because that's going to affect what it does on the average price. And you need to know actually what you're spending on it, because what happens is the price is going to change up here as well. Cost is not going to be shown up here, only the price that's calculated. So in this case, the 948 is up here. Let's go ahead and go down. You can go to the portal. We're going to pop over there and take a look at it. This is just a working part, is the row by row information from that. And this will be updated when you're adding in the portal that we just visited. You can go back and click on edit. It'll take you back to that record. And up here, if this record row, for example, you put something in and it was a quote, and say the guy is not going to buy it, you can easily just delete it from the rows. For example, I could delete it out of this row, and say if I had 10 items in here and one was a quote and the other ones were shipping and all this stuff that's in here, this is the current status. If it's not going to be a quote anymore, we can eliminate that row and take it out of the purchase order so that it's not confusing when it goes up here as a priced item. Obviously it's classified as a quote, so it's not going to be billed. And what you need to do is, until it's actually purchased in this particular case, you take the 1 out of the quantity. It'll remove this. I'm going to just go ahead and show it. I'm going to remove that and watch what happens. You'll notice that it says minus 948. Now, for some reason, it's not updating. Oh, part quantity ordered. I got the wrong one. That was received. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it out. Boom, goes to 0. You got to think of these both when you're putting it in there. If you remove it manually for a quote, you don't want to have a received in there. Okay, so now I'm going to say I'm going to order it. I would change this to say vendor pricing. I checked it. Follow-up pricing I did. Order placed. In this particular case, if you're going to place the order, you would change it to order placed. Put the quantity in that you actually ordered. If this is going to vary, for example, you may need to order again. You could put one line in there for an item that has not been purchased for a reason. Maybe there are only 5 of these on hand and you needed 10. You would put a row in there for purchasing the 5 that are available. You'd put another one in here showing the status. You need a pending delivery or pending whatever RMA required. Whatever it may be in there as far as that row is concerned, you have the ability to do a checkup, for example. Follow-up price or whatever you're doing. Maybe you're going to go to another vendor for this item. Now in this particular case, see the -1. We have a part quantity on order that we want to buy, and yet we haven't received it yet. And if the order is placed, then you don't change anything in here until it's actually received. So this should be not a date in here. Okay, just want to point out all the pieces. Now if I put the date in there, or the quantity order was received, it's going to add the data back in. This is why I'm going a little slower now through this stuff, because it's going to be critical when you're going through here to understand all the pieces and parts of how this works. Okay, now let's go to the payment. What we've done is a quick little thing that you can do. Most of the time you will probably pay the full amount of the actual item when you're going to be buying it, and you're going to do it on the purchase order. You actually pay it after you receive it. So when you get all the items received, or you have some other way you do the payment, you would come over here and say, for example, you have a 948 amount due. So I could put the 948 in there. And I would say, okay, there's 948. You can put up to 7 payments in here. Now, if I pay the whole thing, the balance should be 0, okay? And it says a payment of 948. But say, for example, I wanted to deduct something out of this. I'd put the 948 in there, and then what I would do, I'd say minus, say 200. Maybe there was a payment made. Now it's going to give you the balance of what is owed instead of the full amount being paid. Okay, so what you'd go over and you would go ahead and put in the amount paid. In this case, it was 200. I put 200 in as paid. And then you could have 7 payments in here. Now understand that if you change the 748 up here and then show the next time you paid it, or you can just leave it in there, most likely you're not going to do 7 individual payments, but that's the way you'd pay it off. So I could put the 200 in here. And now you can see we're down to 748. This is to calculate. It's a little mini calculator, and this is the actual place where you would enter the actual amount that was paid. So if I came back in another time and I said, oh, we got another $100, we paid it. Okay, and we have to do a what? Minus in there to make it work. I did that on purpose to see that, okay, you got to put in a minus in there because it needs to be deducted from the balance that's due. So it's now 648. And if I change this to $300, then you can see that we are at 648. You can look at here, and you can make sure your balances are correct as far as the amount owed. Okay, so that's a running total for that. This is just an ancillary thing. We're not going to have to worry about it. It's just where if you want to go see a record or go down into this thing to find, say, for example, the standard price or whatever, this is where you can go to do it. And like I said before, if you're in an ID number 1, this is the ID. See how it gave both the same part number here? And what you would do is it should be, typically should be the same standard price. Unless you ordered an item one time and the price deviated from that, you could see what you actually changed the price to over here. Now these are locked. You're not going to change them here. If you had to, you would go over to the record by going to the part number field, and then you could change the vendor cost to whatever the new vendor cost is, and it'll change this over here to the average cost, indicating that the price since the last time you priced it out either went higher or lower in the actual inventory screen. And so let's go back over here and then back over to purchasing. And you can see that I've got the information in here I needed. You'll also see that I said some quantity purchased. Depending on all the items that you purchase here, it's going to give you a count. And then based on the ones you receive, it'll put a received in here as you receive them as far as the quantity balance due. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, you can contact us. But let's go back to the next thing. Let's go back over to marketing. And let's go into the individual purchase portal. And what I want to point out in here as far as the purchase portal is concerned, you'll show the record with a header on it here and then the portal below. The header on this is a single record pretty much. See, you can't see it move as far as when it's going through. As you add a record over on the other side, it'll pop back over here and add the record into the purchase thing. So this is basically repeat information. After you created the header, this also helped to create this record. The vendor and information and everything you do over here should be reflected. If you come back over here and check, you'll see that we showed the one item we ordered. We showed the date received, the quantity received, the date ordered, and the PO number. And in this particular case, we did create one PO where that showed up in one PO, and it should move through all of them now. If I want to go back over to the portal for this one, I can look at all the information for individual. If I wanted to find a record that was specifically for a part number or all the part numbers for this, I could go up and do a do action, search, and then perform the find for any of the things I'm looking for example, like part number or a date or whatever, because this is, you don't look in a portal for data, you come in the actual portal on the other screen, you come over to the individual portal record, and then you do the search within this screen to find any record in the database. Okay, let's take a breath here. We're going to go over and see that project purchasing also has a list view. Now this is kind of an interesting list view because you're going to be able to do searches in here and get some specific information. Before we even do something though, I've got three purchase orders in here, and I was playing with data so they're not all sequential. I did 1 to 4, and then for some reason I deleted them when I was testing. So we got 5, 6, and 7. This is one of the things when I go back, I'll be emptying these records out and you'll be starting over at 1 as far as the purchase order number for the original next record. You see the record that we added in data in the purchase records. Now, at the bottom, for all the records in selection that you're viewing, you're going to get a summary of all the expenses and what was paid and not paid and so forth in this particular list view. And I did this and I got here by going from the purchase order screen by clicking on the list view for the project purchasing list view. Now let's do something. For example here, if I wanted to see only the item 2 records for all the items that were purchased so I could see the summary for all the number 2 records, I would just do a do action, start a search, put in number 2, go ahead and go back and say perform the search, and now I'm looking at the summary of numbers for the list view for all the items that would have been ordered for the item 2 or the work order, the project 2, and then I could see the purchase orders where they were ordered at, and I could see all the information: what vendor was it ordered on, the date it was ordered, and then the information for the sum of paid. Now, obviously, if the amount paid here is 0, and you're working through these records for a particular project, you're going to be able to see the ones that have not been paid yet and the ones that have been paid. So it should be pretty obvious when you go through here. Now, one of the things I'm doing is I'm also doing these videos, but I'm proofing to make sure everything is taken care of. What I will be doing is putting under the sum paid, if there's amounts up here and you haven't paid anything, I'm going to put this so that it'll turn red when it has not been paid in full. So we're going to have that in there. Okay, to get the information back, again, as I said before, don't leave this record unless you come back in and say show all records again to bring back all the data for all the records. The reason for that is if you're looking at a list view that's related to this one and you hid these, the only one that's going to show up is the one you did the last search on. Okay, so let's go back over to the project marketing, and let's go down to the, we did the proposal, we did all this information in here and a little bit about inventory. Let's talk a little bit about the project suppliers. This is actually pretty straightforward. You need to have a supplier in the records, and you always create the suppliers. If they have not been created yet, you put them into the project supplier record on the marketing screen. So you would fill in all the data for this, and if you needed any vendor notes, you could do this. Now, let's say, for example, well, darn, did I actually ever put this guy in here? Well, what you can do is you can go over to the list view, and you can see all the people for vendors that you've added. And in order to go back to the edit screen, you can just click this. It'll take you back over if you want to edit it and add different information to it. And so that is the portal record where you're going to from the list view. Okay, and it has a little tiny bit more information. And this is actually a combo field. You do not have to edit this. What it's going to do, it's going to reach up and it's going to take the information from what was added in the record, and then it's going to put it over here from this. Vendor phone, vendor address. Okay, here's an error that we did. There should have been an address in there. Remember how we had that part number in there? Well, it didn't belong there. So you need to put an address in there for that particular vendor, which is the correct one. So I just took it out. You'd have to go look it up or whatever at their website and then put that in there. So that goes to the next thing. If you're looking over here and there's a website listed in this area, you can click this button to go get more information if you need to, and then more information about the vendor itself. And also, if they have pricing on their website, you can go to their website and look up the part number you may be looking for to see if the current price is okay. So this kind of ties hand in hand. So it's really a good idea to have the vendor's email and also the project vendor website. Now, what you can do when you click this button, make sure that you have the http:// in your address. Don't just put transg.com, because the way that the internet works, it needs the http: in there and the // So be aware of that. Okay, let's go back and go back to marketing and the supplier data. We've covered that. We covered the purchase orders, and a little bit about the inventory. So in the next video, we'll be talking about the quality and the quality portal. Now, I do want to say one thing. Quality is something that should be done as a part of each purchase that you do to make sure that the product that you receive has been quality checked. And we're going to be going through that on the next video. Okay. I missed one item a little earlier when we were doing the purchase and purchase portal. I'm actually in the inventory screen. When you do a purchase and the item that came in was short shipped or was damaged, you have to create a record for a return authorization. Now, this may come in under different types of names, but basically what it is, short shipped items means you didn't receive the full items that you were supposed to get, and it might be that the damaged items are not repairable and they have to be sent back. You would come up here to the return authorization and bring up this pop-up screen while you're in the inventory. You wouldn't do this in the purchase order because we're really talking about the particular part for the inventory. Appropriately, you should be picking the part number for the project that you're in so that you identify that this item 1 was for project 1, and you're going to do the authorization for that. That's the one you did under the order. So what you would do is you'd come in here, and this will automatically add an RMA ID for this particular project. It'll just come over and be ready, or it's auto entry. You'd come over and you take the contact person that you normally work with in the marketing group or sales group. You'd put in the RMA number that should be provided by them in this space, and it can be any kind of sequential alphanumeric content. The date the return authorization was created, obviously the vendor that you were working with as far as the actual record is concerned, the RMA quantity that need to either be returned or short shipped, the quantity received once you receive them back, and then the cost for each item is important. You'd put in the individual cost in here. That would give you the value based on the quantity, the cost item, and then the value is calculated for you. You would give the vendor quantity that was given to you as far as the quantity or the credit. For example, if there's a credit coming in, it would be a credit. Vendor replacement quantity, if they just sent you replacements. This one's kind of important. If they're going to give you money back, you need to understand that you got a credit, and you need to know what the credit is going to be for the part that you're either going to pay separately. In other words, they're going to return a credit to you, and there's a number of ways that could occur. You could either get a credit against new orders, or you can get a credit back on the amount that's the balance that's going to be paid to them. And then you would put in the part number in this particular thing just to have that part number that you're working with. You keep your notes for that particular item that you're working with. The reason you're putting in the part number, there's actually a report for RMA, so it needs the part number added here. And then the quantity remaining for replacement would be calculated based on the items that you have, and the quantity remaining value would be put in here, calculated based on the actual value right here for the credit. And what I would do typically when I'm down here is you already have the date that you should have created it up here, order requirement date. But I would put something in there. Every time you contact them about the RMA, put the information for that individual RMA item in, because it's based on the part number. It'll be different throughout any PO. So you might be working one PO and you need to come back and do an RMA based on it. And when you get back into the purchase, I think, remember now, when you click on it in that record, it'll bring you back to the record that you worked with. For example, if I go over to the purchase record, in the purchase record, remember, I can go over here. I was in this record right here. If I want to go back over and see that record to make some notes or follow up on the RMA, I'm looking at the quantity that's been ordered. If I have an RMA indicated in here, as far as right there, RMA required or completed, I would be putting that in on that line item for the RMA until I get the items that are completely for the orders. Say, for example, this is 10, I receive 5, then I have a remaining quantity of 5 until those are actually taken care of one way, either way. For example, did I get paid for them, or did I get a credit for them, or I returned them? That's what you need to put in there. And obviously, if you want to see the actual item, I'd go over here, click once to get rid of that, and then go ahead and pop over to the record that we're working in right here. Then I can put my notes in there from the vendor list, or notes down here about an item being on RMA, and then of course I can adjust the RMA for that individual item. So you can navigate by one button click to get back to everywhere you want to go as far as creating an RMA or following it up. And every time there's been an RMA on this particular part number, it'll be indicated in here in the scrolling fields. So if I created another one by adding ID or whatever in this area of the contact, it should create a new auto entry, a new one, and then the following information for that actual part number for that record. And that's why we have the 1 on this record. Remember, I talked about we don't put the actual the project number in each record when we're doing a purchase or even in the inventory, because we have the clicking related item right here that we want to look for. When I click on it, it should bring me back into this record. Okay, so just a quick go back and look at this thing in the project purchasing. We can see the items where they are, if they repeat, which record they were actually for. And in this record, this scrolls up and down so you can pick whatever one you want to work with. And that way you can go ahead and just click on that. Now these are locked, so you can't click on this. You have to click on the part number to take to that record. Okay, if you have any questions, just contact us and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.